Alright, so welcome. Second episode of our little series on car control here. What we're going to be talking about is braking. The first episode on acceleration, that, for the racing world, it's critically important to be getting off the line quickly and getting out of corners quickly. And in the real world, daily driving, it's really important when you're driving on slippery surfaces, when you're driving in the snow, when you're driving in the mud, if you're driving on a beach. Acceleration is pretty important, but really more important than that for daily driving and racing situations is braking. How you're braking, when you're braking, where you're braking, how effectively that brake input you're giving the car is getting the car to either slow down or assist your turning or do whatever it is you want to do. There's a very famous quote that I think it was Andretti said, it's really funny that so many drivers think the brakes are for slowing down. Really, they are, and we'll get into how they affect the turning and the stability and the weight transfer and everything else in the more intricate kind of racing theory and how that can apply to daily driving and stuff like that. But let's talk about braking for right now as, hey, we want to lose speed as quickly as possible. Whether you're driving down the road in your family go-getter and there's an animal in the road or another vehicle pulls out in front of you, maybe you're on the racetrack and you're really worried about braking at the last moment, not wasting time, getting in and out of corners as quick as you can. Being able to brake to slow the vehicle down very quickly and competently and safely is really important, and it's something that isn't touched on very much. So the first thing you're going to need to deal with if you're looking to slow your vehicle down as effectively as possible is really only go for that when you're in a straight line. If you're on a straightaway with the wheels straight and you don't have much side-to-side weight transfer, the car is pretty well balanced, that's when you're going to be able to really get on the brakes really hard, get the vehicle to slow down, the tires are rolling down the road, and you'll be able to stop your vehicle or go from 80 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour for a corner or something like that very, very quickly, very, very safely, and it's going to work out well for you. If you're in the middle of a corner and you go for really aggressive braking, you're going to have a bad time. And we can talk about that. You can certainly brake in corners, but you're not going to be braking at 100% of that vehicle's capability at that point. You're using some of your grip for steering and you want it to hold around the corner. If you go for lots of brake, you could eject yourself off the road. So whenever you're looking for maximum braking, your full vehicle's potential, make sure you're going as straight as possible with the steering wheel straight on a good grippy piece of road, and you'll be able to brake hard and get that vehicle slowed right down. So always brake in a straight line when you're looking to slow down as much as possible. In the rally world, in the real world, in different vehicles, on different surfaces, what you're going to find is most people daily driving brake pretty smoothly, and you're only using a small amount of that vehicle's capability to brake when you're coming up to stop lines and approaching corners and doing all of that kind of stuff, stop lights, excuse me. So, finding that maximum amount of braking you can possibly use on that surface without going a little bit over is really difficult. So it takes some practice. It takes practice on different surfaces and different cars and everything else, but it's a pretty simple thing to find a safe place to try this stuff out. It's going to make a big difference when you do get out there, in an emergency situation on the road, or certainly out there on the racetrack. You need to have a really good feel on the brake pedal, hopefully with both feet, to be able to get that vehicle slowed down as effectively as possible. If you're braking near the vehicle's limits of adhesion on that road surface, what you're going to find is if you go a little bit too hard on the brake pedal, the tires are going to lock up. Or the ABS is going to come on in a modern car if you haven't disabled it. When the tires lock up, essentially the phrase wheel lock up means the tires have essentially stopped turning, they're stopped at the vehicle while the vehicle is still moving forward. Or, you've heard probably the phrase percentage of wheel lock up, which is to say that the tires are still turning slightly, but maybe the tires are rolling along at 30 miles an hour while your vehicle's doing 70 miles an hour. And that, you've probably heard that's a terrible thing. Never lock the tires up. Don't do it. You're going to lose control. You go flying off the road. And the answer is not necessarily so. If you're going for the maximum possible braking, locking the tires up, either to some percentage versus your road speed or completely lock the wheels up, can be an advantage. When? On a loose surface. If you've got a gravel road, say there's some pebbles, say there's some mud, say there's some sand, say there's any of this stuff that you'll see on a gravel road or an unimproved road, or even it's, after the winter there's some sand on top of pavement. There's a million surfaces out there where you'll find if you brake carefully, you're braking on that sand or clay or mud or water on the road or whatever the heck it might be. If you go beyond where you should be and you intentionally brake a little more aggressively than that surface will allow you to, the tires are going to lock. That's going to do a couple things. The main thing what we're looking for is to get that plow effect, right? So if you're braking carefully, you're on the mud and the cheese. If you brake aggressively, that tire is going to lock up, and what it's going to do when that tire locks, it's going to start to push away all this crap in front of the tire and hopefully bite down into a harder, better packed, grippier surface. So on a gravel road, you'll probably see rally racing cars and off-road desert racing trucks and all of these other vehicles that are racing and driving aggressively on unimproved surfaces are locking the brakes up whenever they want to lose speed aggressively. 80 miles an hour, there's a hairpin turn coming up, wait till the last second, lock the brakes up for that last bit of that straightaway, and they'll slow that vehicle down way more quickly than if that didn't happen. So locking the brakes up can be an advantage. It'll burn this stuff up in front of the tire. It'll plow you down to better grip. The world's a happy place. Is that always the case? Absolutely not. Maybe you've got an inch of snow on top of glare ice, or some other horrible situation where braking really carefully is your best bet, and having a really good feel in the brake pedal and trying to figure out what's going on is the only way you're going to get the vehicle slowed down safely. So that's just a matter of reading the conditions, looking up, maybe testing the brakes once in a while. You'll see most good drivers up here in the winter, you get out especially early in the season when you're not used to snow yet, you'll find a safe place, whether it's on a straightaway or a parking lot or whatever, and brake really hard and see what happens. Brake kind of medium, brake kind of medium hard, brake, different shades of brake pressure to see, ooh, I'm gripping, oh, it's slipping now. Okay, that's the right amount of brake for that temperature on that snow on that day with that vehicle, etc. You see how I'm going along with this. So entirely a judgment call, but know that locking the brakes up can be a massive advantage. The one time it's not is when you're on a hard surface. If you're driving along on a two-dimensional surface, we'll say, such as hard pavement, glare ice, you're driving along on a hockey rink and you slam on the brake pedal, that tire's going to lock up and just go skidding straight forward. You're not going to get this effect because it's just a hard, solid surface. You're not going to be able to dig down into it. It's not going to do anything for you. You're better off not locking the brakes up. Same with pavement. You'll probably see on pavement, it's abrasive enough that if you lock the brakes up and those tires are stopped while the car is doing 50 miles an hour, you're actually going to put a big ugly flat spot in your tire. Now your tire's not going to be round anymore. It'll be thumping along and it's going to be a bad day. So what we talk about, okay, well, if you don't lock the brakes up, how does ABS work? Why have they put ABS in cars? Well, it's so that you don't get into these skids. You don't lock the brakes up and just go sliding along. Mostly, okay, you're not going to stop as effectively, but it's mostly for corners. If I'm driving along and I'm halfway around this corner going in this direction, and I lock the brakes up right there, the whole vehicle is going to slide off that direction. Where with ABS, you've got that security blanket. You can brake like a complete numbie and just dynamite your whole leg on the brake pedal, and it's going to not let those tires lock up, and chances are it might not stop, but it's going to probably keep going around that corner. That's why ABS is in cars. You regain the ability to steer while you're full on the brakes. Is it possible to brake around this corner without ABS? Yes, but it takes a more delicate touch, and you're really bargaining how much grip you have, and you're splitting that between the steering that you need to make the turn and the amount of brake pressure. In an emergency situation, to be like, ooh, I'm 40-50% on the brake pedal, the tires are slipping a little, ooh, I better back off. When there's you know, a deer or something horrible standing in this road right here, most people panic and brake hard. That's just the way it is. Until training gets better and more people realize that, okay, we might not need these safety systems if we did a little better driver's education. We've got ABS, let's work with it. That's what ABS is for. That means on a loose surface, in the snow, in the mud, on gravel, on sand, on any of this stuff, with anti-lock brakes, you're not going to get this effect. So if your vehicle is equipped with ABS, you're going to be stuck braking on the pebbles and on the mud and on the loose stuff. So, you know, without ABS, I might be able to go from 80 to 0 in 100 meters, total guess, I'm not going to do the math, where it might take me twice as long to stop if I have ABS, you know, on the same surface. Pavement, ABS isn't really going to hurt you too bad, but it's there and you might be able to do better on your own. And what I'm saying, you might be able to do better on your own, I'm not saying lock the brakes up. What I'm talking about is you've probably heard the phrase threshold braking. Threshold braking is a really simple term that means as much brake pressure as possible without locking the tires up. So if 80% brake pressure locks this tire up and you go sliding along down the road and that's ugly, well, maybe 75% brake pressure, they don't quite lock up and you're braking really effectively and you can get this vehicle to come to a stop. Modern ABS systems might be able to beat you. Modern ABS systems are going to sense tires almost locking up and alleviate that brake pressure for milliseconds on those tires. So really the goal of ABS is to do threshold braking for you, as much brake as possible and avoiding wheel lockup. You probably find, especially in older cars, but certainly with newer cars, you might be able to find if your ABS was shut off, you know, if you're doing 80 miles an hour and the ABS stops you by here, if you get a really good driver, you might be able to find that with the ABS off, you can threshold brake really effectively and you might be able to get the vehicle stopped 10 feet sooner, 20 feet sooner, 30 feet sooner. Depends on the driver and the surface and the vehicle and everything else. But most of the time, without ABS and really good at threshold braking, you can usually get your vehicle to stop on any surface faster and more effectively than the ABS system is going to allow. Yes, racing vehicles and racing ABS systems and some of this other stuff that they have out there is very, very good. And the thing with racing is, okay, you can do it once, right? You might be able to beat ABS on a good day when you've got a good night of sleep and you had your favorite cup of coffee and you know the stars are aligned and you're really on your game and you're not thinking about anything except for, you know, how you can use that vehicle to its maximum potential, you'll be able to drive better than ABS. If you don't get your sleep last night, you had to fly across the country and you're on a different time zone and your girlfriend's yelling at you and you know they didn't have coffee at the hotel or whatever's going on and your vehicle's driving funny and you've got other crap in your head, leave the ABS on. Because like I said, you might be able to do it on a good day when you're doing really well, but ABS will do it every single time very consistently and you'll be able to plan on that. And if you've got other stuff going on in your head and you're not able to pay 100% attention and do a good job of driving, you're just having a bad day, leave the ABS on pavement for sure and just take that out of the equation because it's really consistent. Where you threshold brake one time and you stop about that quick, and the other time you lock them up and it doesn't stop until there, and the next time you stop about that quick. So when you're planning, you know, you're driving around a track or an autocross course or something and you're planning your braking area, it's going to be a little different every time, regardless of how well you're doing. But if you're doing badly or not paying attention or you're just not on your game, it could be very different every time. Where with the ABS, it's going to be very consistent. You can take that out of the equation and worry about other things. You might not be as quick, but you're going to take less risk of, you know, getting flat spots on your tires and or just not braking well enough or whatever it might be. Leave the ABS on. On a loose surface though, big advantage, shut the ABS off and you'll be pretty good to go. You've probably heard about pumping the brakes, right? And we don't typically teach pumping the brakes. That's an old method because again, what we're talking about is, all right, if you can get good at threshold braking, you should be all right to do your thing. The problem is that threshold braking is quite difficult. So if you had a graph that was like brake pressure versus time, what you'd find is, you know, if this is the perfect threshold brake right here and then you're off the brakes when you turn for the corner, pumping the brakes, it was out there for people who weren't great at threshold braking, because it takes a little time to get used to that in different vehicles on different surfaces. So pumping the brakes is the idea of, okay, maybe braking too hard and then releasing that brake, and braking too hard and releasing that brake, and braking too hard and releasing that brake. Is that going to be effective? No. But it's better than going to wheel lockup and just staying there and having the tires just smoking and flat spotting and squealing and flying straight off the road. And this pumping the brake thing, again, if you're like, ooh, brake, 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 you know, if you have a corner, it'll help you because you're not full brakes and full steering. Now you're easing off the brakes as you're trying to corner and stuff like that. So there's a time and a place for it, but really it's just an old method, because this threshold braking isn't that great. ABS is doing the same thing as this pumping deal. It's just doing it on millisecond levels. So, you know, if this was ideal, ABS is doing this to you. Your pumping the brakes is going to be slower than that because ABS happens, you know, 5-10 times a second, depends on your vehicle. But either way, you're looking for this perfect amount, and these systems or techniques don't always quite get you there. One thing that most people don't quite get a handle of, and a lot of people, when we start talking about left foot braking, they're like, oh, when and where and why and how and what and whoever. Left foot braking, while you're trying to stop as effectively as possible, can help you. I'm not at all saying hold the gas pedal to the floor and get on the brakes when you're coming up to a stop sign. You're going to have a bad time. It's not going to work out the way you want. But what you'll see is your regular vehicle as you're driving down the road, pardon my car, it's going this direction, if you sense you're on a slippery surface, like the wintertime, or you're just driving really fast or something like that, when you go to brake hard, you'll probably find that these tires are going to lock up pretty easily because they're just kind of freewheeling along. So there's no real torque going to those wheels. You've probably seen different vehicles. Your driveline can affect your braking. We'll talk about that in a second. But what you'll see is left foot braking gives you the ability to keep some gas on when you brake. Not full throttle, but you might find if these tires are just turning along down the road like they would on a trailer or something like that, they're just freewheeling, if you hit the brakes, they'll lock up. If you can keep some torque applied, you'll keep that tire turning. And under hard braking, you can leave a little gas and you can get the vehicle to really nicely go from 50 miles an hour to 40 to 30 to 20 to 0 and you're done. So keeping some torque on that spinning wheel, not spinning wheel, but keeping some torque on that turning wheel will allow you to brake really well, and you can often get a vehicle stopped or slowed down more effectively by leaving some gas on when you brake so that the tires just don't completely lock up on you. So that's where we're talking about situations where maybe the vehicle's doing 50 miles an hour and you can, by balancing the throttle and the brake, get these tires to be doing 20, 30 miles an hour. And that's going to get you slowed down really nicely and you won't get into a skid, right? Because if you lock these brakes up, okay, you might be stopping, but you're skidding down the road and it's kind of scary. Leave some gas on when you brake, you'll keep torque on those wheels and it'll stop really nicely. So left foot braking can help you. Find a safe place to do it. Make sure your vehicle, doesn't cut the throttle on you. Your ABS isn't coming on, whatever. But in a racing car and stuff like that, you'll probably find on the gas a little when you brake, and you can get the vehicle stopped really nicely, and it works out pretty well. What's going to affect your ability to brake? Say let's think about it in the racing terms, but let's again take that to daily driving. It's going to be the same deal if you're driving along down the road and here you are bombing along and all of a sudden you're going this way. You realize you're doing 80 miles an hour and common sense and good judgment tells you that, crap, you need to be doing 20 miles an hour by the time you're at that corner or you're going to go flying off the road. Same thing if there's an animal in the road, somebody pulls out in front of you, you're looking to scrub as much speed as possible without losing control of the vehicle. What's going to dictate how well that happens? The weight of the vehicle. Heavy vehicles don't stop as well as light vehicles. That's why, you see race cars are always talking about trying to get weight out of them, and you see all the carbon fiber and all the silly stuff that we're doing, trying to make these cars lighter, and it's really expensive, and that's fine. That's why we're doing it, amongst other reasons. But the heavier the vehicle it is, the worse it's going to stop. The lighter it is, the better it'll stop. Your tires are very, very critical because those are kind of your last link of connection with that road surface. If you've got good tires for the surface you're on, pavement tires on pavement, snow tires on snow, gravel tires on gravel, whatever it might be, you'll be able to stop this vehicle much more effectively. If you've got snow tires on pavement, it's not going to stop that well. If you've got pavement tires on snow, it's not going to stop that well. If you've got all-season tires on gravel, again, you're not setting yourself up for success maybe as well as you could. And tires, we could do a whole video about tires, it doesn't really matter. Make sure you get the right tires, the right tread compound, the softness versus hardness of the rubber, the right tread pattern, whether or not it's got grooves, or you've seen racing slicks that have no grooves in them, and what the grooves look like, and what they're doing for the surface you're on and everything else. Tire pressures are very critical. If you came in here with 50 PSI in your tires, it's not going to stop that well. It's going to start skidding, and it's going to be ugly. Where, lower is better. Once you go too low, you get in trouble or wear them out too fast. But pressures are really critical for any of this, whether it's performance driving or emergency maneuvers on the street or whatever it might be. The right amount of pressure in your tires is key. Temperatures, tire temperatures are really, really important. If you've got very cold tires, it's cold out, or you haven't been driving aggressively or something, and a situation happens where somebody pulls out in front of you and you slam on the brakes, they're not going to work that well. Versus if it was a hot summer day and now you've been driving around for a while on those tires, they're going to stick to the road a lot better. That's why you see a lot of the racing teams have tire warmers and everything else. Before the car even goes out, they've got those tires up to a nice, warm, almost hot operating temperature so that those tires will stick to the road as best as possible. And you see that on all surfaces, tire temperatures and all that stuff. So that's going to affect it. Your suspension, a big old Cadillac or something with blown shocks or loose bearings and bushings and that kind of thing. When you go to brake hard, things are going to all kind of squish and move around, and it's not going to work out as well as you want. Versus, hey, if your bushings are all pretty tight and your shocks and your springs are good, and your suspension is pretty snug and tidy on that car, it's going to stop a lot better than maybe a big SUV or just something with clapped out suspension or loose bushings and that sort of thing. It's not really going to stop that well. Obviously, the grip you're dealing with, we don't really need to talk about that. The more grip you have, the better you're going to stop. The less grip you have, the longer you're going to need to allow that vehicle to slow down. The one thing a lot of people don't quite get sometimes here is the drive line of the vehicle is going to affect how well you stop. You've probably seen it. We've done a lot of testing on this sort of thing. Front wheel drive vehicles versus rear wheel drive vehicles versus all wheel drive vehicles. One of the reasons we tell people in the wintertime to put their SUV from 2-wheel drive into 4-wheel drive isn't so they can accelerate in 4-wheel drives uphill all the time. It's also because they can brake more effectively in 4-wheel drive than they can in 2-wheel drive. What you don't want when you're braking is a freewheeling tire. Right? If that tire is just rolling along down the road, like the back tire on a front wheel drive car or the front tire on a rear wheel drive car, there's no resistance to the braking effort that you put with the brakes. So those tires are going to lock up easily. The front tires in a rear wheel drive car, if you brake a little too hard, they're going to lock up and there's nothing you can do about it. Where you'll see the rear tires don't lock up as easily. Okay, the brakes are smaller, there's no weight on, we can talk about that. But it's the same with front wheel drive cars. The rear tires are going to lock up more easily than the fronts are, because even if you're just in gear, the engine's turning, the transmission's turning, the axles and the drive shafts and everything else, there's some torque, that wheel's being turned. And when you brake, now you're not just trying to brake a free turning wheel, you're trying to brake that wheel and the axle and the transmission and the engine, and it's going to be harder to lock that up. So the drive line of your vehicle can affect it. You'll see, let's say you're in a pickup truck in 2-wheel drive, and you go hard on the brakes and the front tires are locking up and you're skidding along, and it's not going to stop that well coming into this corner. Where if you were in 4-wheel drive, you'll get better braking out of all 4 tires and you'll be able to stop more effectively. So the drive line of the vehicle, you could get into the brake bias. Most vehicles, let's say all vehicles, the front brakes, let's make it an ugly sedan Jeep hatchbacky thing, the front brakes are that big and the rear brakes are that big. Well, that's because when you're going in this direction and you get on the brakes, the weight transfers to the front, and those front tires braking are much more important than the rear tires braking. Plus, if the rear tires lock up, the back end's going to slide around, which is a dangerous situation. So all automakers, you've got better braking from the front wheels than you do from the back. That's why when you're going backwards fast and you're braking and turning, it handles all wonky and the thing likes to spin around on you. If you had bigger brakes on the back than you did on the front, for example, that vehicle would be really crazy and hard to drive. So just knowing what you're dealing with, there's a lot of factors at play when you're trying to slow the car down, and that's just something that you can take into account. Especially if you're driving your daily driver around with 400 pounds of gear that you don't really need in it, that could be affecting your braking distance a few car lengths, in an emergency situation. So, keeping your vehicle okay, not stripping it out and taking crap out and getting rid of your AC so you can stop fast, necessarily. But even in your daily driver, think about weight, make sure your tire pressures are good, make sure you kind of have some of this in your back pocket so that when a situation happens, you'll be able to deal with it pretty effectively. The big thing to worry about when you are wheel straight, braking hard, a lot of weight transfer is going to happen. All of that weight is going to dive down onto the front of the vehicle. So let's say here's our car again. What's going to happen to you, it's an ugly car, it's going that direction. And what's going to happen to you here is those front springs are going to compress. The rear springs are going to open. So here you are driving along down the road, going this direction, again because my car's a really ugly shape. What's going to happen when all of this weight transfers to the front is those front tires are going to push down. They're going to bite really well into the surface. The contact patch is going to get bigger if your tire pressures are correct, and you'll be able to stop the vehicle really well. But if the rear end is now going up in the air, that can lead into trouble, right? Full braking, the back end of the vehicle can get a little bit loose. Regular pavement scenarios, not really going to be a problem, but on gravel in the wintertime, on loose surfaces, on the sand and the clay and the mud and the whatever, that can lead the car into oversteering a little bit when you're on the brakes. When is it the most likely to happen? When you're going down a hill, right? Because here you are going down a hill, same thing, we'll do a real ugly car. You're going down this hill. Now when you brake, not only are you going downhill, all the weight's on the nose, now you're off the throttle and on the brakes. Now all the weight's on the front end of that vehicle. So especially in a car that's normally light in the back end, like a front wheel drive car or a pickup truck or something like that, that's where people get into these big skids and lose control of the car, is when that weight shift to the front happens and they don't expect it, or they do it real suddenly instead of smoothly putting the weight there. Sudden abrupt weight shifts will get you, especially down hills. And the other thing is if the road is off camera, right? You don't see it too much on a normal public highway, but the road has a crown to it, so that the water sheds off and goes into the ditches and flows down into the streams and the river and the lakes and the ocean. Because if it didn't, when it rained, that's how roads get puddles and potholes and fall apart and go to hell. So every road has a crown on it. Even the interstate dirt roads have more of a crown on it than a paved road, because the water really needs to shut off a dirt road, because again, puddles and potholes and all that, ruts and washouts and all that horrible stuff. So moral of the story is, if your vehicle is sitting up here, in the middle of the road, you'll be able to brake really effectively without getting into too much of a skid. If that weight transfers to the front, here you are driving along, you'll be able to brake really hard right there because the vehicle's nice and level without expecting too much of a wobble out of it. If you were in the same scenario, but for some reason you were over here, same thing, here you are in your little space car driving along, what's going to happen when that weight transfers to the front end, when you're on that off-camber surface, that's going to want the back end to poke out sideways on you, and you can get yourself into trouble. So especially on a dirt road, we see it a lot just from racing. Same thing, if you've got a corner coming up, the conventional line, we can get into later, but would dictate, hey, we're going to be over here so we can get a good line for this corner. Well, if there's a really severe crown on that road, you don't want to be over there if you're going to be really slamming on the brakes and trying to get the vehicle slowed down. So if you've got two tires on really good grip and two tires on, you know, a more slippery surface, whether it's a painted line on the road, or maybe you're off the edge of the road onto the shoulder, or maybe it just happens to be wet or slippery or muddy or something else over there, that's where braking hard right here is going to cause the vehicle to end up probably yawing hard into that direction. Just like you dropped an anchor off that side of the boat and the whole thing is going to turn. It can be pretty violent. It can lead to some bad situations. So maybe if you recognize you're in this situation, move the vehicle slightly so you're on 4 pieces of equal grip, or just brake a little more carefully and be ready and expect that it's going to try and pull you in that direction and you'll be good to go. One thing we're not necessarily always fighting, but we hear a lot about is engine braking. Okay, I got a downshift coming into these corners, and we get engine braking and downshift. And we get a lot of people that are just force revving these motors, and it's not really what they were intended to do. Your brakes are meant to slow the car down. Your engine's made to make the car go. So, you know, if you're coming into these turns, your first priority, whatever situation it is, like I said, emergency situation on the road, you know, you realize, oh, I'm coming into a off ramp a little too hot, or whatever it is. If downshifting is the first thing on your mind, it's pretty hard on equipment. It can make the vehicle go into a skid. If you downshift abruptly, it can be pretty ugly. You can either break something or put yourself into a skid or do something really bad or just cause premature engine wear and that sort of thing. Not to say don't downshift. You know, certainly, especially in the wintertime or on a loose surface, say I'm driving a truck down a steep hill, I want to be in a low gear. I want to use that engine braking so it's, and I don't have to use the foot brake much. Because they might lock up or whatever reason. I want to hold myself back going down this hill. I'm going to use engine braking. I'm going to select a low gear, not to the point of over revving the motor or doing something really dramatic, but I'll go in a low gear going down a hill, so I don't have to use the brakes very much. Daily driving especially, or off-road driving, it's all wonderful. A situation where you're doing 80 miles an hour, same thing, coming into a 30 mile an hour corner, use the brakes. A lot of people get on the brakes hard, and okay, you know, once you get it down to 30 miles an hour here, you want to start accelerating again in a racing environment especially. You can heel and toe downshift. You can just get the brakes on and smoothly shift while you're in the corner. We've talked about left foot braking and shifting without the clutch. There's a lot of different things you can do. Modern sequential transmissions and dog boxes are all happy and give you a lot more options. But realistically, the brakes are made to slow the car down, not the engine. So get on the brakes aggressively, do a good job of braking right here, start easing off the brakes, select the right gear and go. Is going to be a lot better. We see a lot of people when they start driving aggressively, you know, all of a sudden they're flying down straightaways, and oh, tight corner, downshift. Ugh, it can be ugly. Get on the brakes aggressively, get the vehicle slowing down. You can rev match, whether you're left foot braking and shifting without the clutch and rev matching, or heel and toe shifting, so that that downshift isn't abrupt and it doesn't break equipment or send the vehicle into a skid. The whole idea is to be able to come into a corner like this and get the vehicle slowed down, smoothly select the gear that you need without just pinning the car into a problem right here, and be able to track smoothly out around the corner. So you can downshift while you're braking. There's definitely ways to do it. Just be a little bit careful about it, because shifting is your second or third priority. First priority is get it slowed down. Second priority is make the corner. Third priority is accelerate out of it. And we see a lot of people when they start driving hard, it's like, oh, they're worried about shifting first and then braking here, and by the time they're at the corner, it's too late and they're off the road. Okay, they got into the right gear, but they're in the woods. So just something to take in mind right there. So that's the basics of braking, you know, for advanced daily driving and for certainly performance driving and that sort of thing. The big thing is, okay, it's to be done in a straight line, practice in a safe place, all of that happy stuff, different vehicles, play with your tire pressures. We're going to talk later where that's not necessarily always the case. It's not always possible. In the rally world, we come across 10,000 different corners in every single race, and it's always a little slippery here, or grippy over there, or uphills and downhills and off camera, and it's always a crapshoot. So you're going to end up in situations where doing the best you can, you're driving fast, everything's going well, but either you've made a mistake and you didn't hear something, or the co-driver made a mistake, and all of a sudden you're coming into a corner with too much speed, say you're still doing 60 miles an hour and that's a 20-mile-an-hour corner, you're going to have to brake aggressively, but you're going to have to brake through this turn. And we'll talk more later about trail braking and braking in turns. Know that it's definitely a possibility and it's a life-saving thing and it's a critical skill to have. But your best bet is always to see these situations coming up, pay attention. Basically, trail braking and this braking in the turn stuff is either for driving fast on slippery roads or basically you've screwed up. Either you didn't hear the co-driver, he didn't say something, or you didn't see it, or you're driving too fast without enough information, without good enough visibility, it's foggy out and you're driving like an idiot, and all of a sudden there's a tight corner. That's where you're going to need a trail brake, and that's where you're going to need a trail brake in and or be braking in the corner and pull it off and get out of there, and you'll probably get away with it if you're really good. There's ways to do that, and that's kind of one of the things that we're really good at, is teaching people how to do that sort of thing. But no, that's not plan A. That's plan B, plan C, plan D. Something's gone wrong at that point. So really try and do a good job, drive within your limits, drive what you can see, or with your co-driver telling you, and plan ahead and be smart about it. Do all your braking in a straight line and you'll be faster. You know, it seems really exciting to come in here at 60 and brake and get the right amount of braking, the right amount of steering, and look in the right place and do all the right things and pull this thing out of your butt right here. But chances are, you know, the guy who saw this coming up, he braked hard, he got turned, he's on the throttle, he's gone. He's 5 seconds faster in that corner probably. Didn't feel faster, you know, he just straight line braked, got it turned in, got the right gear, and he's out. Where you're doing this big scary braking in the turn thing, and it's dangerous, it feels faster. You got this big skid and it's you're looking, trees are coming and you're bouncing off the ditch. It definitely feels faster. It's definitely a lot slower. So have fun out there, be safe, and we'll see you next time around.